I'm really delighted to be with you tonight. We'll discuss about Switzerland and Israel, and it's interesting to compare both because we have such a distinguished entrepreneur with us tonight, Shlomo Kramer, and so that's the fantastic opportunity to have an open discussion. What can we learn from Israel as a startup nation? And you see the book here, I recommend you to read this iconic book because this has made the branding of a nation. Startup Nation has been written 15 years ago, and it has really crystallized all the good news, good stories you can talk about Israel and how you can brand it to the rest of the world. Actually, Switzerland can also be proud of its innovators and startups, entrepreneurs, and let's see what we can learn more specifically in terms of commercializing innovation. So we're talking about scaling up, ambitious developments, what we can learn from Israel. We're talking about two very similar countries. The same number of people, around 9 million, out of which 30% are foreigners. In both countries, we share that we were not born in our home country. And the other 70% obviously have got a strong international background, or they are secondos, you know, they understand what that means to move to a new country. It's also interesting to see that Israel and Switzerland have deserts for about 60 to 70% of their territory. So all the action is on a 30% piece of land where is concentrated most of the population. And last but not least, both countries have got a strong R&D budget. 19 billion R&D for Israel, that's 5% of the GDP. It's one of the highest in the world. Switzerland is 3% only, but you're still talking about $22 billion. So similar countries, similar firing power, but I will tell you there is a fundamental major difference when it comes to scaling up innovation. It's called venture capital. We'll talk about it a bit later. Talking about deep tech, Israel is a deep tech nation because deep tech is about innovation led from scientific labs. Typically from universities. You see the top three here, Hebrew University, Technion, and Tel Aviv University. Great institutions, and out of these, there come about 1,500 startup spin-offs, academic spin-offs came out of this ecosystem. And the same in Switzerland with ETH, with EPFL, and once the research is mature, you need somebody to commercialize it. That's what we mean, or I mean, with deep tech. So deep tech is a large concept, including biotech, medtech, everything which requires scientific research, as opposed to low tech, like if you do a business model innovation, you invent Airbnb, for example, B2C, you don't need any research lab for this. That's why Switzerland and Israel are focused primarily on these scientific startups and not on B2C. And this is why the benchmark is so interesting. Look at spin-offs I mentioned, 1,500 spin-offs from the top 3 or 4 Israeli universities. It's about 1,100 in Switzerland from ETH with 500, and the rest are PFL, Basel, Zurich, and Bern. So it's about 100 per year at the moment in Switzerland. I would say it's more roughly the same number in Israel. So far, so good. We are similar, and we share as well this deep tech culture. In Switzerland, for the last 250 years, we just like this stuff, you know. Such a nice mechanical movement. We are the only people in the world who like complications, at least when it's about watchmaking. And this is part of our gene, you know. We're techies. And that's very important. When you sell quality, high precision quality, it's all about being better than the 99.9% of the world. You want to be the 0.1% best quality. Similar in Israel. You want to be the very best cybersecurity in the world. You want to have the best medtech equipment. You know, we are talking about moonshots, so that means try to solve some of the world's biggest problems with disruptive science-led innovation. And we have one last thing in common. The Swiss German are the only one in the world who can pronunciate this word correctly. Chutzpah, that's that's a word we all want to keep in mind. I know most of you know what it is. It's this attitude of Israeli to really expand their own borders, to think big, bold. And this is very important when you have a startup. Because if you don't have chutzpah, you don't grow to become a category leader. And tonight with Shlomo, we'll have a fantastic example of this. The problem of Switzerland is that we can't compete when it comes to scaling up innovation, because by the lack of investment. If you look at Israel, put $1.4 per invested dollar in R&D into venture capital. Last year it was 27 billion for about roughly 90 billion R&D. Switzerland, it's 10 times lower than this, so 0.14. So you're talking about 10 times ratio. It's not marginal, it's fundamental. So it's a problem because you are competing for the same type of ideas coming from the labs, the same budgets, R&D budgets. You have more or less the same number of researchers. But if one has got much more money than the others, who wins? Obviously, in R&D-led technology, you need more money. So Switzerland would like to take Israel as a benchmark. We won't get back to Israeli ratio, but we'd like at least to have 5 billion per year. And we've launched an initiative at national level called Deep Tech Nation Switzerland, where we want to have 50 billion investment in this decade, 5 billion per year. That would be half of what is the average of the top 12 countries. So we will not be at Israeli level, but at least we can catch back. I'm talking about the output of the venture capital ecosystem. On the Israeli side, 1.5 billion invested in 10 companies have yielded 112 billion of market cap. About a third in Switzerland, 500 million invested in top 10, yield 50 billion. So you see 100 ratio between investment and money created, more or less both countries. But if you put less money at work, you get less. I'd like to point out that Shlomo Kramer co-invested, or no, let's say he was a co-founder of Checkpoint, 16 billion value created. He was also co-founder of Imperva. You see 3.5 billion value created, sold to Thales last year. And now he's into a few other very exciting startups. We'll talk about like Fireblocks or Keto Network. They could fit into this top 10 list. So you see, the story is not finished. And so it's clearly we have tonight the most successful CEO of Israel, if not a large part of this world. What do we do as Swisscom? We try to fill the gap by investing, and it's great for an investor in Switzerland because we have less venture capital competition and lots of upside, lots of good teams to be funded. But we need more investors, more capital to join us, especially in the later stage. We are scaling up ourselves. We started 17 years ago, and we've done 84 investments, half in Switzerland, the other half internationally. And it's about 12,000 jobs created. So you see the same story. Venture capital is a good business, creates jobs, creates value. And we no longer only invest Swisscom's money, but we have a hybrid model where 3/4 of our funding in the last 2 funds came from external institutions. So 20 pension funds, mostly from Switzerland, family offices and banks. So that's how we get to hopefully, we contribute to scale this country up. See, it's all about sensors, artificial intelligence, and how to increase efficiency of farming. That's where Israel is also very good. I just wanted to, of course, introduce Shlomo Kramer. With 2 companies, he's been either investors like Fireblocks, and Keto is a CEO. Those are probably the top 2 cybersecurity startups in Israel. And if you think about it, you're talking about, I think it's disclosed, 8 billion valuation for Fireblocks. It's 5 years old company. So you could see both companies went from 0 to over 100 million of revenues within 5 years, and Fireblocks within 3 years. So those are monsters. You know, it's those animals are species. I don't like the term unicorn because it is it's mostly a matter of valuation. Here we're talking about scale up at maximum speed. And that's what is interesting. And tonight I would encourage you to take all you can from these top 2 examples, because Shlomo has got the experience, and it's not just a coincidence why it happened with him. It's because that's his ambition level, and that's why also investors come in, because they see who is behind those cybersecurity companies. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion next.
Just a couple of words about why we're here, what we're talking about. So to set everything in state. So the global state of cybersecurity, if we look at the revenues that have been generated from cybersecurity over the last 5-6 years, we're going, whether it's Gartner or other sources, from 80 billion to almost 200 billion in revenue. So this is the size of the market, and the cost of cybercrime has risen from 600 million in 2016 and is estimated to go to 23 trillion. Okay, so if you want to be in a growth industry, this is where you want to be, and this is where I chose to be a little over 7 years ago when founding Cyverse. Switzerland is investing into cybersecurity. It has put 1.25 billion in 142 cyber or ICT startups over the last few years. And Switzerland is ranked number 6 in terms of secure internet servers per million inhabitants. A little bit about the state of cybersecurity in Israel. So only in 2022, we saw 2.9 billion that were raised in Israel in cybersecurity. This was a decline from the previous year. It was basically a peak year of 6.6 billion. And we're talking only about cyber investments. This is not the size of the tech investments. Like Dominique mentioned, the tech investments were over 26 billion that year. So it's a very, very active market. It's a very exciting market for investors, for early stage investors like ourselves. We take pride in many cyber unicorns. So the number at the moment is 43 cybersecurity unicorns in Israel. And the average funding until unicorn has been between 200 to 100 million until companies become unicorns. But essentially, as of 2022, we had new 9 cybersecurity unicorns. So, and the unicorns, interestingly enough, they don't take necessarily a very long time to reach. And in terms of the cyber maps, in Israel, every given year, there are about 500 cybersecurity startups. And in Switzerland, this is relatively a new map that was developed. So I would say, from my understanding of the market here, there are about 30 to 50 Swiss cybersecurity startups. We have one of them here, Bug Bounty Switzerland, which I'm personally a big fan of. And but obviously, there's a very big potential here. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage a self-made businessman who has been referred to as the godfather of the cybersecurity industry and who has had unusual courage to innovate and to disrupt the global cybersecurity market in the last 3 decades. Shlomo grew up in Israel and founded his first startup while he was still in high school and sold it to a software firm. He then went on to serve in the very infamous unit, 8200, very unknown, you don't know about it, and we cannot really tell you what we do in that unit. And while serving in that unit, he met 3 people who will together then become the founding fathers of the Israeli cyber ecosystem. It was Shlomo, Gil Schwed, and Marius Nacht, who were the dream team that started Checkpoint in 1993 and IPO'd it on the NASDAQ. Ever since Checkpoint, which he left in 1998, Shlomo has not lost a moment to innovate, to invest, to mentor, and to disrupt an industry that without him, I think would be a little bit boring. He founded Imperva, and most recently founded Kato Networks, disrupting the network security industry. Cato has reached over 100 million in sales in ARR within its 7 years of existence, and recently landed its first significant business in the Swiss and German markets. And actually, this is why Shlomo is here. Shlomo holds a math and computer science bachelor degree from Tel Aviv University and a master degree in computer science from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Together with his wife and 5 children, I learned that today, I didn't know, they live in Tel Aviv. And please help me welcome to the stage Mr. Shlomo Kramer. Now is the fun part. Shlomo, first of all, thank you very much for accepting the invitation to come to Switzerland and to evangelize on your newest baby, Cato. So you founded Checkpoint at the age of 27?
27, yes.
In Perva, when you were? 36, I calculated. And Cato at 49?
49.
Good, I did my math right, that's good. And you invested in dozens of cybersecurity startups. So you were the founding investor in Palo Alto?
Yes, I wrote the first check to Palo Alto.
Not a bad check.
To
Nir You invested in Trusteer, which was sold for how much?
It was sold to IBM. Yeah.
800 million. This is what
it was below a billion.
A billion, below. Okay,
below a billion.
Not a very good exit, clearly. And you invested in Lacoon, that was sold to Checkpoint, in Skyfence, AtBay, Exabeam. Maybe you can start by telling us, how did it all start? And also, how did your service in the intelligence kind of jumpstart your career into cybersecurity?
So when I was 16, I was like a PC kid, but before there were PCs. So in Israel there was Sinclair Spectrum. So I worked for the imported that computer, and we also sold accessories. And somebody told me that it was a computer game on a cassette. And somebody told me that the guy that made that computer game was 17, and he's got a company and sells it all over the world. And that's the first time that I encountered the concept of a startup.
What the Swiss don't have the same as we do is the military service in those cyber units that are so prestigious. How did this kind of get you into it? How would your life have looked like without 8200?
Very different. I can tell you, if somebody would have forced me to rank what was the most exciting period or most exciting workplace that I've ever worked, and I've been at Checkpoint at the heydays of the 90s, and created data security within Perva, and Cato is going to change the landscape of IT forever. Still, the most exciting period was when I served in the army. That was the most challenging and most just amazing experience. So it changed me, and in particular, I would say beyond just the notion of learning a lot and getting huge amounts of responsibility. Seriously, managing 30 people at war at the age of 23 in mission critical situations, that's not something that you can get in the outside of the army. But the main thing that it created was the sense that, the false sense, that you can do anything. And that's why when I think back on the early days of Checkpoint, I was, and it was like crazy. Like we were 3 people in a room, all sorts of unbelievable, going public in less than 3 years. And I think back and we were like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. We can do anything. So that's also something that the army was very much responsible for.
Just not to neglect really why we're here, which is really to take away learnings from the Israeli ecosystem and apply them to the local Swiss ecosystem. So Israel is in this lucky or unlucky position that we really, our military has to be at the cutting edge of technology, and when you serve in the army, you kind of see the future of technology. What can a country that doesn't have this, how do they jumpstart the industry without this very lucrative military service or school that we all have to go into in Israel?
I really believe in deep tech concept, like defining going after fundamental problems. I don't know if what was the reason that the Americans decided to go to the moon in the 60s. I'm not sure that it was deep interest in what's going on the moon. And if I look at the Silicon Valley, there was very much a contribution from military side, but I would say that Stanford and Berkeley was as much, both Sun came out of Stanford, Cisco came out of Stanford. So absolutely, I think that there can be other things other than just the army. That are the seeds of a high-tech ecosystem.
One of the great strengths of our ecosystem is what I would call the network effect. In terms of investors, we see groups, cliques of individuals that are connected to each other, that invest.
Conspiring.
They're conspiring to take over the world together and disrupt. And they invest together, they found companies together, and you're really one of the most exciting people in that industry or in that group of people, because what I find extremely interesting, you didn't just start a company and stuck to it, but you constantly expanded your influence by investing into younger entrepreneurs, by sitting on boards of other companies, and by mentoring these entrepreneurs. By the way, is it true that you, every company that you invest in, every startup, you have time to meet the founders on...
Yeah, that's like a rule. If I invest, they can call me anytime.
And do you sit with them regularly?
Some of them call more, some of them call less, and it's really up to them.
So tell us a little bit maybe how it works. Can you tell us a little bit about this kind of network effect, how it works, how you do this? Because I think from what I see, this is a crucial piece of the puzzle that Switzerland could also apply in the cybersecurity space.
I think at the heart of what you describe is the fact that the profession of being an entrepreneur is something that you can't learn theoretically. It's a profession of the type that you still need to use the previous, before universities, there was the previous method of apprenticeship. I'm not sure that we had, teachers at Checkpoint. We kind of were lucky enough to have enough momentum to absorb the mistakes that we did because we didn't have teachers. But definitely at the core of what I do is the sense of apprenticeships, which is mutually beneficial because people that work with me, and I'm very proud by the fact that I have a third and fourth generation of entrepreneurs that the knowledge has transferred. And I think that if there's one subject that we need to talk about is how do you transfer knowledge, which is transfer knowledge between generations of entrepreneurs and transfer knowledge between ecosystems of startups in order to build kind of the ecosystem from a seed to something bigger.
You're a serial entrepreneur. And my question is, why serial? Why do you continue to work so hard, and what is it that drives you to constantly innovate in the cybersecurity market?
I haven't worked a day in my life, actually. So I don't view that as work. I'm lucky enough that this is what I This is my, I don't know if it's a hobby, but this is something that I do to express myself. And I had a friend that was actually my first, even before Gil Shved, he was my first business partner, and we did the first startup at even before I joined the army, and we actually sold it. And I met him at this when I was 16, when I was working with this selling computers, and he did this job, and then we got this money and we went to have lunch, and he told me it's a good thing they don't know that I would do it even not for money, for free, basically. Right? So it's not money is definitely the way that you measure the success, but it's not necessarily the motivation. It's the love of the game.
Let's slowly move to talk about Cato. I remember when hearing about Cato for the first time, I thought to myself, you know, who are these people? And you talk about 3 generations of network.
Right.
So maybe you can explain to us, in not too technical words, what is it that you're disrupting with Cato? What is the real innovation there? And how come it is already so successful?
Everybody is trying to be AWS, right? So everybody is going digital, and IT is unable to move at that same pace because it's bogged down with point solution, especially in security. And the mass market of IT in general and IT security in particular are becoming more and more sunk in this swamp of point solution. And that creates a huge issue. And I think that the real innovation that cyber needs is not more capabilities, but ways to consume capabilities in a way that allows IT to move at the speed of business. And that's what Cato came to do. And what happened to network security is that I've been lucky enough to participate in the first 2 generations of the firewall. I actually wrote the first commercial software firewall and put it on a floppy disk, if somebody remembers that. It was in my late grandmother's apartment. And then, you know, and that was great. A few years later, there was a second generation because that became a little complex. You need to install it on server. Every server was different, and you needed thousands of these. So there came an appliance, and you can argue whether it's Kenzie from Fortinet or Nirzuk from Palo that created the first real enterprise-level appliance. And that appliance created a huge mess because with digital transformation, you've got more and more point solution, you've got CASB, and you've got this, and you've got that, and you end up with a mess. And you end up with expensive troops of people that you can't hire because there's not enough talent out there. And you end up with a market that you know, if you're trying to get your mid-sized enterprise in the US and you're trying to get in a cyber insurance policy, you're going to pay 5x what you paid a few years ago. So really solving that consumption problem, really coming with a simple solution was key. And the idea was, let's do digital transformation to security. Let's create the AWS for networking and network security. And that's in non-technical terms what Cato is. It's the AWS of networking and network security.
Recently you helped, or Cato helped a large German manufacturer to deal with the situation of ransomware. So how do you, what happened there and how do you help companies basically deal with ransomware?
Let me just say that I want to finish the other thought. At the first 4 years, everybody thought, hey, we are crazy. Then Gartner came in and said, hey, they're not crazy. It's actually called SASE, and it's the future of networking and network security, that AWS-like approach. And then everybody says, we are SASE as well, and there was chaos for 4 years. So now it's becoming mainstream, and now it's the question of who's really providing value to the customer, who's really providing the customer experience that solves these issues. And Hafele is a great example. Hafele is a German 100-year-old family-owned company, $1.5 billion, mid-enterprise, 180 location manufacturer around the world. And they went to bed on a Wednesday evening, and on a Thursday morning they woke up and they didn't have a company after 100 years because somebody encrypted everything to the point where they couldn't restore their infrastructure. And since we were kind of already talking with them, they came and said, hey, come and help us. And in less than 4 weeks, we have rebuilt a complete network security, all their infrastructure from scratch in 50 plus countries around the world in 180 locations. I don't know, something like 10,000 employees, and no other technology in the world can deliver that. And that's an extreme example to what happens in everyday life to organizations that now can go from 30 people managing their IT security to 3 people and free up the other 27 to do other stuff, perhaps move business, digital transformation of the business faster. So at all layers, we bring a huge, SASE in general brings huge value, and Cato brings the full SASE value.
Where do you see the cybersecurity market evolving? What worries you about cybersecurity, and also how do we fit in the whole kind of AI revolution into that?
So what's interesting is that cyber is an overlay, right? So it's everything in our life needs cyber, right? So there's an iPhone, you need to protect it. There's AI, you need to address the challenges. And the reason is that it's really exciting. It really makes cyber a very unique category that is always dynamic, always changing, always evolving. There's also a third player, which is the adversary, the hacker, that always innovates in a red queen race against you, which makes sure that that there's never a stop to innovation. It's a great category, and it heavily relies on the bad nature of human beings, right? So AI is invented, right? So it's a great, amazing tool. I'm sure it's going to be used as a weapon, right? Everything that you invent trains, you can mobilize a lot of soldiers, and there's World War I. You invent atomic energy, there's whatever, there's atomic bomb. So AI is going to be a weapon, and we need to protect. I think that the most interesting aspect of that weapon is actually understanding what's true and what's false. And that's a huge, I think that's a core problem that cyber haven't addressed yet. If I read a tweet, is this tweet part of a campaign run by a country? Is this source legit? Is it a human being? Is it trustworthy? There's no way of knowing that. And AI just makes it 10 times more problematic. The good news is that AI is also helpful on the defense side, right? So it really makes can create the life of a SOC engineer much easier. It makes the life of finding attacks much easier. We use AI at Cato across all of our security stack. So the battle continues.
Thank you very much for this open conversation.
So you spoke a lot about what you're building, what has been the experience there. But what do you feel as the biggest challenge?
Well, Personally, or as the CEO of Cato?
You can choose.
I think the biggest
They-
challenge is the regime change attempts in Israel and making sure that won't happen. And that's existential, both for Cato and for the state of Israel.
For Dominique, the question was, you could choose to work on any of the topics. You chose to work on deep tech nation and on investments. Can you tell us why?
Actually, I was inspired by the book I mentioned, Startup Nation, because that triggered the whole process of thinking about Israel as a startup nation. It's branding for a country. So I thought, let's see what would characterize Switzerland. Not just the mountains, but it's also about deep tech because it's scientific-led innovation. That's why basically I wrote this book, Deep Tech Innovation, directly linked to, as a follow-up to the Startup Nation book.
And when you were working on this project, what was the biggest surprise for you?
Essentially, the depth of quality and entrepreneurial success of this country. I'm talking about the old-style industrial, so-called hidden champions. You know, those companies which emerge from a small city without any capital. They somehow become world leader in a niche, and they are sold for 20 billion, like Synthes for processes. Or there are such great examples. But how does that translate in the digital world? That's the challenge for the Swiss. They know how to do it in the high-precision, non-digital world. But I think Israel has understood how to scale up in the digital world.
I'm trying to think what was different in the Silicon Valley and in Israel. That's the organization that started it, the IDF and the Stanford, say, as two examples, were very generous with their IP, right? Because Stanford is, Cisco was Stanford networking before it was Cisco. And Sun was a lab in Stanford. And quite frankly, Firewall 1 was a firewall at 8200 before it was a Checkpoint. So there was, I think the fact that they are not purely commercial organizations make them better seeds to an ecosystem.
What are the main values that have driven your company successful, if there are any, or is the perfect solution to a big problem enough?
Everybody's got good ideas, but in most areas, you've got 5 to 10 companies. And if you check after 7 years, and most of them have the same idea, you'll see a breakout leader. And the, Wiz, for example. And they are the breakthrough leaders because of execution. So execution is king.
How important is cultural tolerance for risk for establishing a startup ecosystem?
One difference that I've seen over the years is that, Swiss people, maybe European, but especially Swiss, are very long-term thinking. They think in breaks of 100 or 200 years, whereas Israelis, I don't know, Shlomo, how long do you think?
I have a little bit of a different angle on that. I think that the key for an entrepreneur is be able to mentally hold a contrarian opinion against everybody else for a long time. So it's not so much risk as being willing to be a contrarian. Luckily in Israel, everybody is a contrarian. Everybody disagrees with everybody all the time.
I
so
disagree
it's
with
much
you,
more culturally acceptable.
I disagree.
There's a question, I believe it's for Shlomo. If Cato is the AWS of security, how do you respond to the question of redundancy and multi-cloud to a large corporate client?
Our customers have used multiple vendors for many years. And for many years, that was kind of the thing, right? Best of breed. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And there's an advantage to that. I think the future is actually the opposite. The future is put all of your eggs on a single platform. And that's what we provide.
Thank you. The next question is for Dominique and Shira. The Israel startup space developed a strong playbook for developing, scaling, and existing startups. When will Switzerland have one in one place?
when Shlomo starts investing into the Swiss ecosystem. The Swiss startups, they're almost like, it's almost a taboo to sell to a non-Swiss company, like to a global, this is something that in Israel, it's exactly the opposite. You want to exit to an American company because that's great multiples.
Switzerland has got a trust asset for centuries, and you could convert some of these equity, some of that asset into technology. I think that's where we can, and look at banking, it's about a trusted partner. Many things can be done with technology in that space.
If you could have a wish, let's say what's coming in cybersecurity, or what do you think will make a difference for the ecosystem, what it will be?
So to me, the exchange is really the most critical part of the story.
My wish is that each and every enterprise in Switzerland will buy Kato.
Before or after the IPO
the huge
next year?
benefits that it brings with it.
My interest is aligned, but I'm a bit conflicted here. But just the story, why we invested in Kato, you show the power of the ecosystem, because we know cybersecurity, it has to be Israel. So we looked for investors. We asked Silicon Valley investors, what do you have for us in your bag? And they mentioned a guy who did Imperva, and we didn't know, but we trusted he must be a good guy because he did also Checkpoint. And so we invested through Silicon Valley contact into Israel based on Israeli reputation. And at that time, SASE was not so well established. I said, you were still fighting against the establishment. And so you see the power of network, recommendation, reputation. And for Switzerland, the same way will work. Hopefully, if you can recommend a couple of good Swiss startups, everybody will follow you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.